I'll start with a prayer we read from Ibn Arabi's Futuhat al-Makkiyya. So, Assalamu alaikum. Welcome everyone to Muhyiddin Ibn Arabi Society Asia Pacific Kashmir chapter monthly seminar. We start with our opening statement, the intention. Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. We empty our hearts of reflective thinking and we sit together with the real Al-Haq in remembrance on the carpet of spiritual courtesy, adab, attentiveness, muraqabah, and presence, hudur, and readiness to receive whatever come to us from him, so that it is the real Al-Haq who takes charge of our instruction by way of unveiling and realization. So, when their hearts and powers of concentration have turned to God and taken refuge in Him alone, and have cast out of them whatever else is clinging to them of pretension, investigation, rational observation, and intellectual conclusions, then their minds are secure and at peace, and their hearts are purified and empty. When this state of preparedness is in them, the real reveals himself to them as the teacher. And this witnessing informs them of the meanings of these reports and words in a single outpouring. Futuhat al-Makkiyya, Book 1. Now I will introduce Dr. Mufti Mudasir Farooqi. Today's lecture will be offered by Dr. Mufti Mudasir Farooqi. He is a professor at the Department of English and University of Kashmir, a former fellow at the Forum Transregional Studien, Berlin. His research work covers areas such as literary theory and criticism, Sufism and Indo-Persian and Kashmiri literary traditions. His publications include two Penguin classics, one on Tahir Ghani al-Kashmiri, who died in 1669, and another one is Kashmir's foremost Persian poet. Okay, this is the Tahir Ghani Kashmiri, who is Kashmir's foremost Persian poet, titled The Captured Ghazal, Poems of Ghani Kashmiri. So he published this book, poetry book of Tahir Ghani Kashmiri in 2013. The other on Mahmud Ghami, who died in 1855, and one of the most important poets of Kashmiri language, titled Yusuf's Fragrance, Poems of Mahmud Ghami. It was published in 2022. So the worldview presented by Ibn Arabi and his school is undoubtedly the most important influence on Sufi poetry of the Indian subcontinent, including Kashmir. So today's talk will be based on that. So the talk will offer an overview of the influence of Akbarian school on the Sufi poets of Kashmir from 15th century onwards, covering both Persian and Kashmiri languages. So I invite now to the lectern Dr. Mufti Mudasir, Professor Mudasir. Floor is on you, to you now. Welcome.
Thank you, Dr. Noor Alam. Am I audible?
Yes, Alhamdulillah,
okay.
All good.
Okay, so the screen is also visible to the viewers?
To the viewers, yes.
Okay. So thank you very much for having me today on this Muhyiddin Ibn Arabi Society monthly feature. It was some months ago that Frank contacted me and he asked that I should give a lecture on Ibn Arabi. So I consented, but I requested that I would need some time because I was already doing something else at that time. So today we are now here, Alhamdulillah, and I have prepared a PowerPoint presentation because I knew that it was going to be a topic which many people find a bit difficult to grasp because of the ideas of Ibn Arabi. So I think I thought that it would at least give them something to cling on to, and something visual in front of them. And then I will also try to explain wherever I think there is the need to do so. Uh, you probably know that Sufi poetry is considered to be a difficult thing, not just in Kashmiri or Persian language, but I think that across all languages of the world, Sufi poetry is not that easily accessible to a wide audience, to a wide readership. And the reason for that is, I think there are two reasons. One is the Sufi worldview, the Sufi metaphysics. Not many people are really familiar with that because to understand Sufi poetry written in any language, you need to know something about the worldview of the Sufis, the metaphysics of the Sufis. And that is what I'm trying to do in this presentation. I'm trying to say something about how Ibn Arabi viewed reality, how he viewed the relationship between God and the world, God and humans, so on and so forth. And the second reason that I think, which accounts for the difficulty of Sufi poetry, is that they use symbols, and symbols which actually make sense only within the worldview that they inhabit. But that is something that would require, a separate discussion. So I have confined myself to the first one. In this lecture, I would be talking about. I have divided into two parts. The first part is the on Ibn Arabi, his worldview, but only insofar as it has influenced Sufi poetry of Kashmir. Because Ibn Arabi, we know, is a very, very prolific writer who wrote thousands and thousands of pages. I don't know whether anybody has actually read what Ibn Arabi wrote in his life time. Um, and the second part, which is the symbolism, the imagery, I won't go into that because that requires a different treatment and a separate discussion. Uh, why Sufis resort to symbols and an elaborate system of symbols is because again that has a reason. We have our very famous poet, Urdu poet Ghalib, who put it beautifully. Who said that even if you have to talk of God, you can talk of God only through wine and flask and हर चंद हो मुशाहिदे हक की गुफ्तगू बनती नहीं मीना ओ सागर कहे बगैर. That is, that even when you have to talk about God and witnessing of God, you have to resort to symbols like wine and flask and cup and so on and so forth. So we know Sheikh Akbar, his great contribution to the world of Sufism, the ideas that we today call contemplative or speculative Sufism. So let me begin with 1240. We know that Ibn Arabi's ideas, they spread fast throughout the world, from the Balkans to Bengal, as they call it. And he inspired so many poets and so many thinkers. What we today call the school of Ibn Arabi is actually a corpus of knowledge or thought which does not only have the contribution of Ibn Arabi, but many of the people who followed Ibn Arabi's thoughts, many poets, many scholars. And poetry became such an important vehicle for dissemination of the ideas of the school. And I will come to this point where uh, someone like even William Chittick thought that the reason that Ibn Arabi's ideas became so popular in India was the popularity of Jami, Abdurrahman Jami, the great scholar, the great poet of Persian language. So Ibn Arabi's ideas, his teachings, they influenced and inspired generations of poets. And there are few people who are very well known, like Fakhruddin Iraqi, like Mahmud Shabastari. And the most important, I think, the most popular is Abdurrahman Jami, whom who we know in Kashmir as, perhaps the greatest Naat writer, poet of Naats. And Sufis of different orders actually embraced uh, Ibn Arabi's ideas. It is important to note that Ibn Arabi did not himself establish a Sufi order. And although his ideas were so influential that they influenced many ideas, many Sufi schools. Jami, for example, was a Naqshbandi, and he wrote a commentary on Iraqi's Lama'at called Ashi'atul Lama'at. Iraqi himself was inspired by Ibn Arabi. And Iraqi had studied with Sadruddin Qanavi, Ibn Arabi's great disciple and stepson. Now, there is one more interesting thing is that Ibn Arabi's ideas had not only influenced Sufi poets, even non-Sufi poets, poets who do not, consciously write on Sufi themes, they have been influenced by Ibn Arabi. And again, I can give you the example of Ghalib, who, although ostensibly not a practicing Sufi, not belonging to any Sufi order, but his poetry is actually informed by Sufi ideas. गर गर गर्च तुझ बिन जब कि तुझ बिन कुछ नहीं मौजूद फिर ये हंगामा ए खुदा क्या है. He says to God that if there is nothing except you, then why all this hustle bustle? What's going on in the universe? And there is another very beautiful verse of Ghalib, which actually is, I think, as if it is taken from Jami's, one of the Jami's verses, which says that दहर जुज जलवे यकताई ये माशूक नहीं हम कहाँ होते अगर हुस्न होता खुदबीन. So the idea that the world is divine self-witnessing, Ghalib is talking about that here, which we'll come to in a moment. So Ibn Arabi's most influential ideas are Wahdatul Wujud, although he did not himself use this term, but it became popular after him. And scholars have said that it somehow, correctly describes his position. What is he saying? I will just take you over, we will go through this dense, what you call, this segment of Ibn Arabi's thought. What does he think about the world? God is the only being in existence. He's his absolute oneness. And for him, La ilaha illallah actually means that there is no reality except God. God is identified with wujud or being. And wujud, as Chittick has pointed out, means two things simultaneously, being or existence and finding God, because wajada yajidu in Arabic means to find. So for Ibn Arabi, God is not only is God the only real being, but the sole purpose of human existence is to find God. He stresses the experience of finding God not through an exercise of reason, but through tasting or zawq. Now we know that this concept of zawq or tasting was already there in Ghazali, who had written about it, and earlier mystics. And like many other things, Ibn Arabi actually builds on the ideas of earlier mystics and earlier Sufi writers. But this finding of God is not like finding anything else. It only results in hayrat or bewilderment of knowing him and yet not knowing him. So Ibn Arabi's Wahdatul Wujud or oneness or unity of existence, whatever you choose to call it, it somehow means that universe is somehow drowned in God. and therefore plurality is an illusion, like a ray passing through glass. It is refracted, and the ray of light seems, different colors, but actually it is just one ray of light. And for centuries, scholars have debated which expression best fits Ibn Arabi's system. I think this one: all is not God, rather all is in God, who is above all. Ibn Arabi also talks about two things: God's transcendence in incomparability and his immanence. We will come to this point, transcendence and immanence, in a moment. So God's transcendence and incomparability demand that he is infinitely beyond every limitation that defines other things. So the universe for Ibn Arabi, as people who have read Ibn Arabi, know that for him it is a manifestation of God's self-disclosure, tajalliyat. Universe is a theophany, and this is the crux of his idea about the relation of the universe to God. Now, to the question whether there is any proof, any evidence in support of these ideas in the primary Islamic texts like the Quran and the Hadith, you know that Ibn Arabi was a great scholar of Quran and Hadith also. And although he has his own manner of interpretation and his own hermeneutics, but he's not someone who is ignorant of things. We'll come to that when he talks about that hadith, kuntu kanza makhfiyan fa ahbabtu an a'rafa khalaqtul khalq, what he has to say about that. But there is a hadith that the Prophet, and this is one of the, interestingly, one of the authentic hadiths, one hadith where the chain of transmission is pretty sound. Unlike some other hadiths that Sufis are, want to use, and they invoke those hadiths, which muhaddisin usually do not accept as authentic. So there is a hadith which says that if you did not sin, then God would remove you from the planet Earth, and he would bring a new generation who would sin, and then they would seek forgiveness, and God would forgive them. لو لم تذنبوا لذهب الله بكم ولجاء بقوم يذنبون فيستغفرون فيغفر لهم. Now, scholars of hadith would say that this actually shows that, if you read explanations of this hadith, they would say that it actually means that people should not despair of God's mercy. لا ينبغي للعبد, one of the muhaddisin said, لا ينبغي للعبد أن ييئس من روح الله أن يقنط من رحمة الله. One should not despair of God's mercy. But Ibn Arabi and his followers see something else in this. They say that actually, if the universe is a manifestation of God's attributes, then if there are no sinners, God's attribute of forgiveness would not find any manifestation. Therefore, it necessarily has to find a manifestation, and therefore there have to be people who sin, there have to be people who seek God's forgiveness, and then God has to forgive them. In a nutshell, universe is nothing but God's theophany. Okay, getting stuck again. A minute.
Click the escape button, Mr. Can you click the escape button?
I don't know why it's getting stuck.
Your cursor is stuck on a table. That's why you have to click the escape button.
Escape button.
Yes. Your cursor is stuck on a table.
It's still not moving.
Sir, just click on the blank area and after that it will move, sir.
Oh. So we come to this one. For Ibn Arabi, the universe is like God's dream. He invokes the divine name of Al-Batin, the interior, to say that just like a dream belongs to the dreamer and has no separate existence from him or her, the universe has no existence outside God. In fact, he says this about human life as well, our ordinary life of wakefulness. It is true. It too is like a dream. We live in a dream world till death. And Ibn Arabi quotes this hadith, "An-nasu niyamun fa iza matu fantabahu." People are asleep when they die, they awake. And again, just for the information of my audience, that Muhaddisin would say that this is not an authentic hadith. It was quoted by Al-Ghazali in Ihya al-Ulum without isnad, and somehow also attributed it to Ali ibn Talib. But this has a significance for Ibn Arabi, because he would talk a lot in Futuhat about this world and the next world, and how death is the real awakening. Maybe we come to that in a moment. So this is divine transcendence and immanence. God's essence is unknowable. His Zat is unknowable. Yet he reveals himself, though only partly, through the universe, scriptures, and humans themselves. Reason can only tell us what God is not. But imagination, which is khayal, can grasp God's self-disclosure. And as we know that Ibn Arabi calls it kashf or unveiling. And it is important for him to, he stresses this point that we have to learn to balance God's tashbih with tanzih. That is God's comparability with his incomparability, his transcendence with his immanence. And he says that just like we need two eyes to see properly, we need a balance between tashbih and tanzih. So what are we? Ibn Arabi says that he uses this hadith, this verse of the Quran, وَنَفَخْتُ فِيهِ مِن رُوحِي. And it says that when God created Adam, he breathed his spirit into Adam. And he quotes this hadith, in Allah khalaqa Adam ala suratihi, that God created man in his own image. And as readers of Al-Futuhat al-Makkiyya, some people would know that how often he comes back to this hadith, in Allah khalaqa Adam ala suratihi. What it means is something like this. God, which is Al-Haq, who is Al-Haq, he seeks to know himself through creation. And therefore self-knowledge, through the idea of self-knowledge through the medium of otherness. Since God has breathed his spirit in man, God is seeking something of himself in man. His longing for man is actually his longing for himself. In fact, God's longing for man is the cause for man's longing for God. In truth, it is God longing for himself through man. The universe is driven by God's love and mercy for his creation. So what are we? Paradoxically, huwa wala huwa, he and yet not he. But Ibn Arabi also emphasizes this point, al-abdu abdun wa in taraqqa wa rabbu rabbun wa in tanazzala. A servant is a servant, how much he might ascend, and God is God, how much he might descend. This clearly points out to a difference between God and man. And he also says that in his highest mystical experience, he said he realized that I am a sheer servant and there is nothing whatsoever of lordship in me. So all of us know God in ourselves and the world, but most of us do not know that we know. This Ibn Arabi actually explains at one place in Al-Futuhat, when he talks of that who are the true lovers of God, there are only two types of people, says Ibn Arabi, people who know God and people who do not know God. But people who do not actually know God, when they die, they realize that what they have been loving was actually God with a different name. So that would be that point where people would really come to know who they are. فَكَشَفْنَا عَنْكَ غِطَاءَكَ فَبَصَرُكَ الْيَوْمَ حَدِيدٌ, as the Quran says, and Ibn Arabi, I think, quotes this verse, that we have removed the veil from your eyes, and now your sharp is sight. Your sight, your sight is very sharp. You can now see. You are now gifted with a penetrating sight, which you did not have when you were alive. So how is God and beauty, how are they related in this, in Akbarian school? God's love brought the world into existence from non-existence. Wujud is in itself the hidden treasure that loves to be known. And so often Ibn Arabi, and after him, almost all Sufi poets of Kashmir I have read, they at one point or the other refer to this hadith, kuntu kanzan makhfiyan fa'ahbabtu an uraf fakhalaqtu al-khalq, that I was a hidden treasure, I desired to be known, therefore I created the universe.
Sorry, Ustad.
I said that this was an oft-quoted hadith in Sufi poetry, Sufi literature, because this is the cornerstone of how Sufis view things, how they see the relationship between the divine and the creation. And now an interesting thing here is, which I find fascinating, that Ibn Arabi knows that this is not a hadith, because scholars of hadith would say this is a later day forgery. But what he says is that it is still the saying of the Prophet, and it was revealed to me through Kashf. And you can see very easily why such a claim causes so much controversy, because for so many scholars, so many people, anything which is attributed to the Prophet, there is only one way that you can attribute it, that it should have a sound chain of transmission. And no Sufi, howsoever great he is, can actually claim that it was revealed to him somehow that the Prophet said it. But that is how it is. Now we move on. Love is an inherent attribute of wujud. Ibn Arabi says that divine love derives from God's names Jamil and Noor. So continuing with this love and beauty in the Akbarian school, this famous chapter in Al-Futuhat, which is chapter number 178, and also his Tarjuman al-Ashwaq, which is his collection of poems. These actually give us an idea of the importance of love for Ibn Arabi. And love has an important place for Ibn Arabi and also for the poets who follow Ibn Arabi. And he writes in Fusus, then God discloses himself to the entities through the name beautiful, and they fall in love with him. At another place, he says, the cause of love is beauty, for beauty is loved by its very essence. Which means that all created things are by definition God's lovers, because he has bestowed wujud on them. Every lover loves the real, al-haq, but only the knowers, the Gnostics, the al-arifun, know that. And now we come to Jami, because Jami's influence on Kashmiri poetry is direct. This is a prologue to Jami's use of Zulaikha. As I said, that Jami is perhaps the most famous, most popular poet of the Akbarian school. And here he's talking in this prologue, he's talking about the relationship of God with creation, the relationship between Jamal, which is beauty, and Ishq, which is love. Jami, in the prologue to his use of Zulaikha, provides the central theme of speculative Sufism, according to which the divine is represented as a beautiful lady in her chamber. The lady is, writes Jami, is contemplating her beauty in the mirror of the universe, which owes its existence to no one but herself. This means, of course, that the phenomenal world is like a mirror in which God contemplates his own beauty. And Ibn Arabi so often quotes this, in Allah Jamilun yuhibbul Jamal, that God is beautiful and he loves beauty. Although, again, scholars would say that the context of this hadith is different. There were people who, when Prophet said that you should not be, nobody should be proud. And people say that we like that we should have very good clothes, very good, appearance. And in response to that, God said, the Prophet said, "Inna Allah jamilun yuhibbul jamal." God is beautiful and He loves beauty. But we know how mystics interpret the sayings of Prophet, and this is one example of that. So, for Ibn Arabi, the most perfect divine manifestation is the human form. Sometimes one thinks, why is it that Sufi poets so repeatedly talk of? This is something that is a preoccupation with them. They talk of human beauty, the human form. And the answer is here. Ibn Arabi says that the most perfect divine manifestation is the human form. God's self-disclosure finds the best expression in the human form, and human beauty reflects divine beauty. Beauty is that which causes love. The truly beautiful is the divine. And this idea had a profound impact on poets writing about the relationship of beauty and love. Now, as against a rational approach that would emphasize divine transcendence, the ultimate unknowability of God, Sufi poets tend to stress divine immanence. And we will see that Sufi poets talk of this aspect more than anything else, because for them, God is, everywhere. He's not limited to any place, and his tajalliyat, they are there in this universe everywhere. So this immanence actually finds a lot of treatment in Sufi poetry. Now, this is primarily because for Sufis, love is the most powerful way to approach God, to develop a relation with Him. A completely transcendent God cannot be loved. This is one of the conundrums in Islamic theology, the balance between immanence and transcendence. I was reminded of Abul Kalam Azad, who in his Gubar-e-Khatir writes about this problem of how this plays on the mind of a believer. In fact, all mankind, they're seeking something which they can see and touch. And in classical Islamic explanations, we have this discussion that how this desire for immanence is perhaps at the root of polytheism, but we will not go into that. Now, to see God wherever you look presupposes His immanence. Aynama tuwallu fasamma wajhullah. Wherever you look, there is a face of God. But it is not pantheism, because Ibn Arabi is quick to add that He is everywhere and yet He is nowhere. Now, love and beauty in Sufi poetry. This is a very famous Sufi saying, that al-majazu qantaratul haqiqa. The metaphorical or the allegorical or the apparent is a bridge to the real. The reason why beauty in its human form is celebrated in Sufi poetry, because human form evokes love. And this is also one of the fascinating aspects of Sufi poetry, that there is a ambiguity, a sacred profane ambiguity, and the paradox of eroticism. This paradox of eroticism is itself a fascinating chapter in Sufi poetry, that they talk of God in terms of human beauty, female beauty, and they talk of wine for divine intoxication, the intoxication of lovers, and so on and so forth. A classic example is the reception of Hafiz. Why was Hafiz, who very explicitly celebrated wine and beauty, female beauty, why was he such a favorite with Sufi poets, and how did they read him? There is a whole corpus of literature on that. Now, Ibn Arabi first wrote his Tarjuman al-Ashfaq, and then later on he added a commentary on that. And he explained this point, trying to say that on the surface, he celebrates his love for Nizam. Nizam was a girl, a beautiful girl he saw during his stay in Mecca. But actually, he is celebrating the divine. His love for Nizam serves as a metaphor for the love of God. And so often Ibn Arabi talks about female beauty, feminine beauty. It has a special spiritual significance for him. It becomes a vehicle for witnessing divine beauty. And he also quotes some ahadith in this respect to illustrate his point. Now we come to this point. the station of the Prophet Muhammad. I'm going through, very fast because I don't have time to explain things. Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam is the most perfect embodiment of God's self-disclosure. And in a moment, we will see how this occupies a central place in Sufi poetry. He calls Muhammad's mirror the best mirror in which God's self-closure can be seen. The term he uses, Haqiqat-e Muhammadi, Muhammadan reality, to describe the receptive active entity, the medial between God and the rest of the creation. Historical Muhammad, who lived in Arabia in 7th century, was only a manifestation of Haqiqat-e Muhammadi, Muhammadan reality. And as I said, that no Sufi poet writing in Kashmiri language misses this point. They have written Miraj Namas and they have written Naats, and they talk of this Muhammadan reality in one way or the other. The importance of the Prophet's Miraj for Ibn Arabi, the highest experience possible for a man. In fact, Ibn Arabi and many Sufis provide accounts of their own visions, which bear striking resemblance to the Miraj. Miraj for Sufis is something they have to actualize in their lives. Now, having seen this as a background to what kind of themes we can expect in Kashmiri Sufi poetry, let us come to Kashmir. Sufis and Islam in Kashmir. Now we know that in 14th century, Islam was introduced on a large scale by Sufis from Central Asia and Persia. But Islam had actually arrived in Kashmir much before that. There's an interesting reference in Louis Massenon's The Passion of Hallaj, where he says that Hallaj visited Kashmir in 1895. This is in Louis Massenon's book. And in 1320, Rinchand the king of Kashmir, he converted to Islam through a Soharwardi Sufi called Bulbul Shah. And we can imagine that how the contribution of a Sufi in converting the king, how that actually makes a place in people's imagination, and how it makes them respect and such Sufis. And there are stories about in hagiographies and histories how that happened. Now that started. That led to the influx of Sufis during the Muslim Sultanate from 1339 to 1556. The two orders which were most important were Soharwardis and Kubravis. There were other orders as well, but these two were very influential, and there is also material available on how Ibn Arabi had influenced both these Sufi silsilas. Mir Sayyid Ali Hamadani, who died in 1385, he is also known as Bani-e-Musalmani dar Kashmir. And he was a Kubravi, and he wrote several works on Sufism, which clearly show a great influence of Akbarian school. Hal al-Fusus is a commentary that he wrote on Fusus al-Hikam, although I have not seen this work, but people have written about it, and they say that this is a commentary on Ibn Arabi. His Chehel Asrar is a very famous collection of ghazals, a collection of 40 mystical ghazals. The opening verse of Chehel Asrar is Qibla-e dil aftab-e rui ust, Kaaba-e jan khakirah-e kui ust. His sunny face is the Qibla of my heart, and the dust of his street is the Kaaba of my soul. And then we come to Sheikh Nuruddin Wali. He's the first Kashmiri poet, Rishi poet, and he's very famous. In fact, the most famous Kashmiri poet still. And his poetry is dominated by ideas like Sharia, following of Sharia, cultivating virtues such as patience, austerity, self-discipline. Purely mystical verses are very few. There are few verses like, oh God, people worship you because they want heaven and hell. Who would come to you for your own sake, which is reminiscent of Rabia Basri's famous words. So the dominant theme in Nundrishi is the ascetic rather than the mystical. Now we won't go into this because I'm not left with much time. He does talk of Kunir sometimes. Kunerai boza kunino rozak, em kundran kuta dud jalao. Akalte fikir tor kotsoza, kemi mali hokchat sudarya. If you know oneness, you will be effaced. How manifest is this oneness? Reason and wisdom have no access there. Who, friend, could drink from that sea? But I'm of the opinion that this need not necessarily mean oneness as in Ibn Arabi's thought. There is another verse, La ilaha illa sahi kurum wahi kurum panun pan, wujud travit mojud rutum, telibavotuslamakan. There is no God. I perfected, there is no God but God, and made myself like the revelation itself. Being I left to realize the presence, thus I reached the realm of spacelessness. I find this intriguing because he uses the words wujud and mawjud. He says, I left wujud and realized mawjud, the terms that Ibn Arabi often uses, but he commonly employs the term mawjud for all existing things. Perhaps Nuruddin Rishi means that I didn't search for the unknowable essence of God and found God in the phenomenal world. Okay, so I will skip this. Suharwardis were there, but I don't find much influence of Ibn Arabi in Suharwardis. Kubravis, on the other hand, I see them as most powerful expression in their poetry of Ibn Arabi's ideas. So these three poets, Sheikh Yaqub Sarfi, Habibullah Naushahri, also called Hubbi, and Mirza Akmaluddin Kamil. These are the three great Kubravi poets in whose poetry is actually, every line speaks of these ideas of Ibn Arabi. Sarfi was a great poet. He was also called Jami of Kashmir, and he wrote this Sponge Ganj, that is Khamsa, 5 Masnavis, Maslaqul Akhyar, Wamiq Azra, Layla Majnun, Maqamat Murshid, Maghaziun Nabi, and all of these are imbued with Akbarian ideas. In addition to these Masnavis, he also wrote ghazals and rubais. Let us look at this few lines from this ghazal. Hawai mehfishan ya Rab mabar birun zis sar mara ki husne tust az in khurshid ruyan dar nazar mara بدیه چشمه که در آینه عالم رخت بینم مکن محروم از آن چون مردم ناقص بسر مارا نبات و قند بیاد لبت چون زهر در کام است به حمد الله کی روزی از قضا شد این قدر مارا. Look at the translation. Lord, let not the desire of the moon-like beauties leave my heart, for it is your beauty I seek in their sunny faces. Grant me an eye that can see your face in the mirror of the universe. Don't deprive me of that blessing like those defective in sight. Without the thought of your lips, sugar and candy are like poison in my mouth. With your thought, even poison is like honey and sugar to me. And here is one beautiful rubai. Ay biman tu wali naman tu natu man. Balki tu mara chujani waman chun badan. Nay, nay, غلطم من و تو این هر دو تویی غیر تو کسی نیست همین از سخن. O you who are me when with me, though I am not you nor you me. Rather, you are like my soul, I like the body. No, no, I am wrong. I and you are both you. There is none beside you, that is all. And Hubbi also mainly wrote in Persian, but he has left some Kashmiri poems as well. There's a famous one which uses this Yar Gaso Divaye, Kuntu Kanzan Ave, and all that. And it's filled with these, ideas of Akbarian school. He who is named Muhammad came out as a manifestation. Then he took on different forms. Let us rise and go to the festival. And then there is Kamil, who wrote Baharul Irfan. And Baharul Irfan is, I have not heard of any other Masnavi in Persian, which was written in 80,000 verses. It has 80,000 verses. And there is a prose excerpt from Baharul Irfan, which actually tells us how indebted he is to ideas of Ibn Arabi. Hama ashya ki bezever hasti arasta shudand, az nur Hazrat Mustafa be wujud amadand. وذات بی چون و چگونه حضرت ایزد تعالی در جمال با کمال سرور ما ظاهر و مشهود گردید و اشیا همگی به اون نور محمد جمله انوار از این نور هستی یافتند. ماهیت نور این است که نور و ضیا داشته باشد و جهان و اکوان از آن مستنیر گردند لذا جز خدای تعالی در واقع کسی ظهور نیست. Everything that comes into existence does so through the light of Muhammad, the chosen one. The indefinable essence of the Almighty God is made manifest by the beauty and perfection of our Master Muhammad. And hence all things are brought into being only through the assistance of the Muhammadan light, although their modes of being find hundreds of thousands of ways. The nature of the light is such that the universe is illuminated by it, so that in reality nothing except God, the glorious, is manifest. I will skip this. There is a beautiful ghazal on the same theme. I can read just the translation. I was in an assembly one day when I heard the perfect masters of the way say, whoever desires union with God needs no skill save the desire for annihilation. He who dies to himself lives eternally. No one can waylay such a man. Shed the cloak of I-ness so that you see your own robe-like being through God's essence. The price for the divine union is the two worlds and your life. Buy an eternal life for a very paltry sum. Now from Persian, now I briefly go to Kashmiri. Persian greatly influenced Kashmiri poetry, and its influence can be seen in genres and in themes everywhere. And Kashmiri poets, he is the pioneer. Mahmud Gami is a pioneer along with people like Mumin Saab, Shah Ghafoor, and he is the first one to introduce Persian genres into Kashmiri. He is also called Jami of Kashmiri poetry because he wrote many masnavis in imitation of Jami. Let us look at Jami's use of Zulaikha and Sheikh Sanan. An excerpt from Jami's use of Zulaikha. Yusuf explaining this to Bibi Rabia, a woman enamored of his beauty, in this way. God created countless spirits in the world, pure from blemish like spotless mirrors. The hidden one, that is God, hidden one in Akbarian school, could not brook self-concealment. He took a mirror and got engrossed in himself. You can see him in lovely curls and dusky moles. A single beauty manifests in myriad forms. A million mirrors reflect him alone. Matter and spirit, within and without, when face to face with an appearance, leave the husk, catch the kernel within. Forms infinite have a single core. In the beginning, there was just one. Forms will decay, come what may. Fix your eyes on the meaning's core. Choose a love which will ever be yours. Love him who will live eternally. And there is this another beautiful masnavi taken from Farid and Attar, Sheikh Sanan. Attar talks about Sheikh Sanan in his Mantiq Tayr. But interestingly, Ibn Arabi also talks of this theme of Ishq Majazi as, how it gets transformed into Ishq Hakiki, where Ibn Arabi actually recounts Ruziban Baqili's falling in love with a singing girl. And Sheikh Sanan's taken from Faridin Attar. And this poem actually illustrates the idea of the transformation of profane into divine love. The theme of love as an all-consuming force until you sacrifice everything, even your adherence to your faith, you won't reach there. So this, for those who don't know, Sheikh Sanan is a seventh, very famous Muslim sage who has a great following, a great reputation, and suddenly he falls in love with a Christian girl, and he begs her, she refuses, and then she lays down her, set of conditions that you will give up your faith, you will burn the Quran, you will bow before an idol, and you will become my swineherd. Are you ready? If you are ready to do these things, then only you can have me. And he is so helpless before love that he agrees to do all of these. And then after he has passed through this ordeal, he again re-emerges. But to revert to be a better Muslim after an immense suffering, which is what Mahmud Gami talks of in this Masnavi. There are other poets, Kashmiri poets like Shah Ghafoor, Shah Qalandar, Soshkaral, Nemsab, Wahab Khar, Samad Mir, Rahim Sab Sopuri, Rahman Dar, Waz Mahmud, Ahmad Batwari, Shams Fakir, Ahad Zargar, and some others. So I will just take a few more minutes, Akib, before I conclude. And there is a widespread belief that Sufi poets are illiterate, and whatever they write, it is from inspiration. I think that is a bit of an exaggeration. Not all Sufi poetry is the result of an intense personal experience. We should know this. Usually, we tend to think that, okay, if he's saying this, must be some kind of flash, some kind of experience, some kind of personal epiphanic moment, but need not be so. It's difficult to say which is and which is not, but for a intelligent reader, it is necessary to keep this in mind. It is clear that not all of these Sufis whom I have just named, they were not all very well educated, and their poetry reveals different levels of engagement with ideas. Almost all of them belong to a low social class with little opportunities of formal education. In most cases, their verses reveal just a smattering of Persian and Arabic. And not all are equally good practitioners of the art of poetry. Some show a better grasp of the craft than others. Now, this is my understanding. I think Ibn Arabi's influence on Kashmiri Sufi poetry, especially in 18th century onwards, late 18th century onwards, is indirect and anonymous. Because it's very unlikely that they could read Ibn Arabi or other scholars of his tradition. And they were, of course, exposed to some Persian poetry, and they had their majalis, their mahfils, and they almost certainly picked these ideas from their mentors, learned men, other fellows in the assemblies of Sama and Zikr. Now, what are the main characteristics of Kashmiri Sufi poetry of 19th and 20th century? A lovelorn speaker yearning for union with the divine, an all-pervasive oneness, kuner, love as an all-pervasive force in the universe, and an engagement with the immanent, transcendent dynamic, and references to Sufi cosmological allusions like creation of the world from the divine or Muhammadan light, references to the pen which wrote everything, human destinies, the ocean of oneness, the creation of Adam, so on and so forth. And then use of symbols, mainly borrowed from Persian, but some typical to Kashmiri as well. Mahmud Ghami has a famous poem called Tamsil Adam, Parable of Man, which uses the symbol of an air bubble surrounded by water on all sides. And symbols are important, as I said earlier, because they point to a suprasensory realm. And then there is this erotic and wine imagery. Sometimes you'll find that a Sufi poem is indistinguishable from an ordinary love poem. And find two strands in Kashmiri poetry, which are not always separate. One is eros-oriented, the other is nomos-oriented. Now, this is something that has already been discussed with reference to Persian poetry by people like Animir Shimel, and one can find resonance of that in Kashmiri poetry as well. The idea is to negate the self, to negate I-ness, which is the first condition of the path. If there is one figure who is repeatedly invoked in Kashmiri Sufi poetry, it is Mansur Hallaj. Anal Haq. This ana is, it's like ubiquitous in Kashmiri poetry. And then finally, it is love of the Prophet Muhammad, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, conceived in the Akbarian manner. So I will give a few examples to show that how these themes are treated by Sufi poets. The theme of, for example, this oneness or divine self-witnessing or immanence. Mumin wrote, Kashmiri Mantukut Tair, Koshur Mantikut Tair, and this is the beginning of that Masnavi. Praise be to him who is the eternal king, who is the beginning of all beginnings and ends. Look closely, he is the maker of all that is, within and without, above and below, only he is. He has torn the veil and reveals himself everywhere, saying, I was a hidden treasure. Love made him pierce through the veil. Look again, nothing around you is unfamiliar. The veil being torn, he is manifest and ever with you. He is Yusuf and he is in the chamber, which is a reference to Zulaikha. On the shop of oneness, all will become one. There is another poem which says, become one with duality and know your true self through yourself. Love sprang and blew like a breeze, putting on the apparel of clay, colorless itself. They often talk of God as a being without a color. Berang, they call him Berang. Colorless itself, it donned myriad colors. Know your true self through self. Okay, we are now coming to the conclusion. Sochkral would say, Aksat bebo ganzar maba, haba yushi gumanai, which means that don't count yourself one and me two. Duality is an illusion. Wahab Khar would say, Har rang ba rang wuchmai panai karith parav, panai panas ashik wuchmai panai kurun ikrar. He is the lover, he is the beloved. So this is who is, all the time witnessing himself. This is divine self-witnessing. Hamat Shamso Vanut Ishkun Afsanatai, Ashuk Chupanai, Pan Shok Supanatai. Again, divine self-witnessing. Kunui Gom Shanwan Tarfan, Zaalam Gayam Pamalo, Sapun Rind Ser Daryav Chan, Tanai Chusbu Divan Alav. This is Shams Fakir. The 6 dimensions collapse for me, the 2 worlds I trampled under my feet. Even after drinking a river, the libertine, that is the lover, is still thirsty. I have been wailing since a long time. And here we conclude. This is a poem by Mumin which talks of the pain of love. Thatcha ashkanit sanje daruniye. Rasi masimaz khynuye lo. Pannui khun gasi tresh kin chunuye. Sui gasi tsangi zaluniye lo. Temki gash gasi yar prazununiye. Rasi masimaz khynuye lo. No joke it is to stand the slap of love. It is gnawing at the flesh of your arms. One has to drink one's blood like water and burn it as oil in one's lamp. Then behold one's beloved in its light. It is gnawing at the flesh of your arms. Thank you. I have tried to keep to the time limit.
Yes, that's excellent. Many thanks for such a beautiful and such a resourceful presentation. It's full of knowledge and wisdom, and the way you have explained, really, it's so deep and so much in your such a fast-paced presentation. So many thanks for such a wonderful presentation. Now I invite the floor to to come up with some question and answer. You can raise hand, and I see Mark Temple raised his hand. So Mark, go for it. So can I request Dr. Mudasir to stop sharing them? Or
sharing.
Okay, no, that's good now. So Mark, you are first, and then I see Badrun Nisa. So I'll then she's in the queue. So Mark, go for it.
Thank you so much, Professor Mudasir. Thank you for your talk. Right at the very beginning, you mentioned Jami, Abdul Rahman al-Jami, and you said a word, it sounded like naqs, or began with N, and I just wondered if you could say what that word is in English. You mentioned it one more time during your talk.
Naqt.
Ah, was it naqt? Yes. What does that...
Did I say naqt?
I think you might have said naqt.
No, I don't think I said naqt.
It was something beginning with N, and it was with reference to Abdul Rahman al-Jami, and it sounded like it might have been a title of one of his works or something. I might have misheard, but it sounded as if the word began with N.
It was not. It was with N. It was not. That is eulogy. You are praising Prophet.
Eulogy.
Abdul Rahman Jami is
with
not. It is not.
Thank you so much.
Okay.
Thank you.
It's an Arabic word. It's a Naate Rasul we call. So when we write poetry praising Prophet, we call it Naat. And then when we write poetry praising Allah, we call it Hamd. Naat wa Hamd. Yeah.
Thank you so much.
That's beautiful. So next is Badrunisa. If you can now unmute yourself and ask your question, please.
Hello, everybody. So actually, I have two questions. So you talked about divine transcendence and divine eminence. So my question is, how do Ibn Arabi's description of the overwhelming and ineffable aspects of divine reality embody the concept of sublime? And in what ways do these notions parallel or diverge from the depiction of divine, from the depictions of divine encounters in Kashmiri Sufi poetry? And my second question is, how do both traditions use the sublime as a means to express the tension between divine transcendence and eminence?
Yeah, see, when we are Ibn Arabi wrote in Arabic. So when contemporary scholarship goes back to Ibn Arabi and reads him in Arabic and then translates into English or some other language, so they are looking at, they are trying to look at equivalents of the concepts that he uses. And now the first thing that we'll have to see is that is there sublime as it understood in modern Western philosophy, is there an exact counterpart of this in Ibn Arabi? And which word has he exactly used for the word sublime? As far as my limited knowledge goes, I have seen words like, which he very often uses, like immanence and Tanzih and Tashbih, and khayal, which is imagination, then hiss, which is sense perception, and so on and so forth. So have you come across the word Badru, which is an exact translation of the word, the original, what is the original for sublime?
Not exactly so, but I had read few papers they contrast Ibn Arabi with Kantian and Burkean sublime. Like they talk about
Okay,
yeah.
so I must confess that I have not gone through this particular aspect of Ibn Arabi. I don't know whether he actually uses a sublime and what actually is a word that he must have used in the original, which later on scholars have talked translated as sublime. But this is the first part. The second part is that uh, when Ibn Arabi talks about divine incomparability and divine transcendence, and as I said, he talks about two eyes, the need to balance the transcendence with immanence, with tashbih and tanzih. When he talks about Zat, he always talks about Zat as something which is unknowable, which can never be known, and yet who can only be known through his names and attributes. That's what the meaning of Tajalliyat is. So, like everything in the universe, everything has two aspects. One, like a symbol, for example, which has two aspects. One is the material, the phenomenal, and the other is what it points to, which is always material, non-physical, which is divine and transcendental. So I think somehow sublime, the idea of sublime would be related to that. Maybe it is also related to the idea of barzakh or isthmus, or the dividing line between the two, which Ibn Arabi so often invokes. As far as your second question is concerned, the difference between Persian and Kashmiri Sufi poetry, as far as this particular aspect is concerned, yes, I think one difference is very obvious. People who wrote in Persian, they inhabited a much larger world. I mean, imaginatively, they were well-read people, they were scholars. The three people that I have talked about, especially Sarfi and Baharul Irfan, writer Kamil, they were very, not only good poets, but they were also very good scholars of the tradition. And therefore, I'm reminded of Abul Fazl. Abul Fazl, writing during the time of Akbar, he was a contemporary of Sarfi. He writes about Sarfi, that Sarfi is one of the best scholars of Ibn Arabi at the present time. So Sarfi, look at Sarfi, how well read he was and what a great scholar he was. And then you also find people writing in Kashmiri in 19th and 20th century who did not have that exposure at all. So that actually shows itself in their poetry, how they treat these ideas. Kashmiri Sufi poetry more or less is, there is more or less an intellectual dynamics is going on, because their scope seems to be limited, and the themes seem to be a few which are often repeated. More often than not, you will find that there is a repetition. The same thing is said. That's what makes critics say that there is monotony. There is not much diversity in Kashmiri Sufi poetry. This is one reason. Thank you.
Okay, the next question is from Latif Dar. Latif, unmute yourself and go for it.
Assalamu alaikum, dear sir. Sir, my question is that you mentioned the word that according to Ibn Arabi, he said that this world is illusory and it has no real existence. So I have a doubt here, sir, that what are we then? So I'm a little bit confused. So please try to answer so that I can understand it well.
No, illusory in the sense that if you think that we have an independent existence of our own, because if wujud is one for Ibn Arabi, then everything that is there besides God seemingly doesn't exist. So it exists only in the sense that it is somehow, a reflection of God. As I try to explain to you, that it is himself that he is witnessing, he is beholding in the mirror of the universe. So illusion in the sense that we are and yet we are not. So this is a paradox. But for that, to understand that, you will have to delve deeper into Ibn Arabi.
Okay. Thank you, sir. Thank you.
Any more question? Yeah, just to explain, Latif, my understanding is when you stand in front of the mirror, you see your image, which is reflected on the mirror surface. So whatever image you see, it does not have any existence of its own. It's actually a borrowed existence from you, which is reflected. So Ibn Arabi uses quite a lot of metaphors to explain this: mirror, shadow, and various other examples. So, and of course, the universe itself is just the zahir, which is the image, but of course, simultaneously, he's batin as well. So that's how our understanding is. But of course, you need to understand metaphysical reality, how it is explained philosophically. Quite a lot of complex formulas are there. But if you want to understand, you need to study a little bit in that area, how the innamal hayat ad-dunya mata'ul gurur. It's a Quranic verse. It's not even Arabic words. It says that the hayat al-dunya is basically enjoyment of delusion. And why Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says it, there is so much research on it from Plato onward. Yeah, but there is so much philosophical description of all those things there. That's my take on it briefly.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Okay, so now I see Mir Hanif or someone else wanted to talk, ask a question. Or
can I ask?
Yes, go ahead.
It was such a pleasure to listen. I wanted to ask, can we classify almost all Sufis of Kashmir as wujudis? Was not a Shuhuri interpretation given cognizance by our major Sufi poets? in Kashmir? Is there any reason, despite that
Difficult to,
our
it is, yeah, it is
our
difficult.
Isha and some of our people were associated with Mujaddid Sahab?
Yeah, yeah. You see, if one thing, first of all, what I want to say is that it is one thing to state something in propositions. So when it comes to the difference between Wahdatul Wujud and Wahdatul Shuhud, you can write books as have been written. But when it comes to write poetry, then it becomes more difficult. And it's not very easy to see where one ends and where the other starts, and what is the line of demarcation between the two. So a Shuhudi poet who does not believe in Wahdatul Wujud, who believes in Wahdatul Shuhud, would perhaps not be saying, when it comes to poetry, not something very significantly different from what a Wujudi poet would probably say. But I have not seen any poet who writes in a way which shows that somehow he's distancing himself from the Wujudi philosophy. And even in the case of Sheikh Yaqub Sarfi, whom they say was a teacher of Mujaddid al-Fisani. This is what I have read, that Sheikh Yaqub Sarfi had taught Mujaddid al-Fisani. How far this is true, I really don't know, but this is recorded. But we find Sheikh Yaqub Sarfi steeped in Akbarian metaphysics, and as can be seen from contemporary, testimony of Abul Fazl as well. I hope this helps.
Many thanks for that. Many thanks for that. I think my reading was that Shah Waliullah Dehlavi already published that the wujud and shuhud, this both idea, they are almost same thing. It's a harmony. It's basically, if there is no wujud, how can you do shuhud? First you are declaring La ilaha illallah, which is the wujud. There is no God but God. Exists none but God. And then we say Ashhadu an la ilaha illallah, that I witness that there is no God but God. So that's how some people understand it and makes it. But some other people say wujud, realize, is part of Tawheed, which is part of Iman. And the shuhud is the experiential, witnessing, tasting, and feeling the presence of Allah is the shuhud. So there is an article written by William Shittig in Encyclopedia Islam. He details what Mujaddid al-Fisani says about shuhud. So yeah, in my presentation, I think last month I touched on it. If anyone interested, you can listen to that part which I covered there. So I think Asrar, you had a similar question. Does this answer your question, or you still want to ask this question? In the chat.
I think it rightly answers the question. So I think if any other questions, Noor, we can take it. Or if somebody wants to comment, please come in and have a brief comment or a brief question, but related to the topic.
That's very good. So anyone else have any other question or commentary? Aqib, do you want to have give any commentary on the overall presentation?
No, I think someone, Bilal, wants to ask a question, maybe in the chat box. Bilal,
Okay.
I think.
Okay, Bilal, floor is given to you, so you can ask the question. Unmute yourself, please. Are you there, Bilal? Can't see your hand though. Bilal, do you have the question still, or maybe he dropped out? I'm not sure.
Am I audible, sir?
Yeah, go ahead. Yes, we can hear you.
I'm Shahbaz Akbari.
Okay, yes, Shahbaz Akbari. Yes, go ahead. You can ask a question.
My question is about wujud. If only Allah exists, then I say Allah exists. Others say Allah exists. We sayers, we callers, where are they? Who are they? That means we are zeros and we speak about one. When one is spoken about by zeros, what are zeros?
So we are zeros.
Yes.
Okay.
So
God.
my question is then, one has subsets. Every set has a subset. We are subsets of that superset. If we are subsets, then we have that given wujud. Not our wujud, not our existence, but we are given wujud. So the wujud is then multiplied. It is not then single wujud, not on one wujud, but the subsets. In fact, we are subsets, but we have the wujud, and it is the given wujud, given by that wujud. Can we have an explanation about it? So in Arabian and Akbarian words.
I think in Ibn Arabi does make it clear that God does confer wujud. He does confer wujud as an act of mercy on the creation.
Act of mercy. Yes.
Because wujud itself, existence itself, is nothing but an expression of God's love and God's mercy. And and as I try to explain that the basic idea in Ibn Arabi is that we realize things فَبَصَرُكَ الْيَوْمَ حَدِيدٌ, as Quran says, once the veil is lifted from our eyes. But it does not happen here. And he makes it clear that even the mystics who are stationed at the highest level of hal, of ecstasy, they will not have the same insight, the same understanding of things as any common man when he or she dies. Any common person, when they die, they go into the next world and the veil is removed, and there they find that what they had been loving they were just names, but actually the real love was for God. And in a way there would be, although he doesn't state it very clearly, but in a way, as Quran says, there will be remorse for a life which is not spent for God's sake. So wujud is there, but it is conferred on us, and it does not belong to us. That's what Ibn Arabi would say. Thank you.
Sir, in the domain of this particular topic, how does our poet Ahad Zargar says in Kashmiri, Wush Ahad Zargaran Don Kuniza. Wush Ahad Zargaran Don Kuniza. Ahad Zargar saw that these two have the same Zat.
Yeah,
English,
that Zat is one, essence is one. This is an oft-repeated theme in Sufi poetry. So I quoted Shosash Kral, who said that don't think that you are one. Another, basically, there is a unity that bonds us together. And, when Sufi poets talk of Mansur Hallaj, I said that he is all the time invoked by Sufi poets. Even from Sheikh al-Alam's time, you have references to Mansur Hallaj. But what was Mansur Hallaj is an al-Haq, and there are different interpretations. So the Sufis tend to say that, just like Rumi said, explaining Mansur Hallaj's experience, that it is like a piece of iron put in fire, which grows so hot, so red, that it becomes indistinguishable from the fire. So that was the experience of Mansur Hallaj, who could not see himself as a separate entity from God. So they talk about this oneness in that sense. So to begin with, there are not two. There is only one. It is only that this one seems like multiple.
Yes, sir. Again, mathematically, 0 is not equal to 1. Never. But in mathematics, it is proved that any number, some fixed number, raised by 0, are equivalent to 1, or equal to 1.
You would know it better. better that Ibn Arabi did not have much, to do with mathematics and sets and subsets. He was too speculative for this. Okay, thank you.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, sir.
I think, Noor, we are reaching towards an end. Maybe
Sir,
we
sir,
could.
sir, can I ask one question?
There's a question. Yes.
Because I
please
am
be brief.
directly dealing with my students, and I am dealing with this Kashmiri literature in English translation. Mudasir sir knows that.
Please go on.
So,
Please be brief. Please
yes,
go on.
yes.
Go ahead,
I
go
have
ahead,
just one query. So that is how to simplify the Sufi, poetry to a commoner so that they can easily comprehend what actually the idea is behind their verses.
No, it is very difficult to say how to simplify things.
Because this is all the way it is complex, no?
It is a complex body of knowledge. So I would suggest that you start with reading certain primers on Sufism.
Right, sir.
And give them names like, for example, William Chittick has written Sufism for beginners, I think.
Just a minute, sir. I will write it down.
I will give you names separately, Hanif Sahab, don't worry.
Right, sir.
There are number of books which try to, as you said, simplify, but simplification also has uski ek had hai.
Right. Because what I am seeing right now, this is from so many decades, I'm experiencing that whether our generations, they are having any kind of, inclination towards our Kashmiri literature or not. But nowadays, in contemporary times, what I feel that they want to know more and more about this literature. That is why we should try to simplify it, and so that more and more audience comes this na हमारी तरफ आ जाए, and they will like more and more, तो उससे ज़्यादा हो जाएगा ये.
You can recommend to them. There are some.
Yes, sir. Thank you, sir.
Okay, many thanks for everyone participating with questions. We are almost close to the end of our session. We can take another question if you like. There is a repeated question which is about Ahmad Sharhindi. The question from Hilal is, can you please explain in full length and breadth the concept of Wahdatul Wujud by Ibn Arabi and its refutation by Sheikh Ahmed Sharhindi in the form of Wahdatul Shuhud, please?
Oh,
I think it needs another session. It needs another session to explain this question.
Yes. This is one of those things which have attracted a lot of discussion, and many things have been written on this. Is there any difference between Wahdatul Wujud or Wahdatul Shuhud, or is the difference just of emphasis, or is the difference just of terminology and vocabulary, so on and so forth? But one thing is clear about Sheikh Ahmad Sharhindi, that he distinguished between essence and existence, between divine essence and existence. And so that is, I think, the basic difference between him and Ibn Arabi. And although we know that people like Shah Waliullah, as Professor Noor was saying, that he said that basically there is not much difference between the two. Anyway, this is a bada lamba choda topic hai, ispe kisi aur din baat ho sakti. Thank you.
Yeah, Ibn Sharhindi himself later corrected himself. In the beginning of his writings, he wrote something controversial, but in his Maktubat later, in Maktubat 3, I have actually the English version of 4 volumes, recently translated by Shad Alam. So in the volume 3, I found that Ibn Arabi, Hazrat Sharhindi corrected himself, and he said what originally he said about Ibn Arabi is not correct. And he himself said that prophet among prophethood, if you want to know, you need to know Quran and Hadith. But if you want to read about sainthood, wilaya, then you need to study Ibn Arabi, because because it was Ibn Arabi who gave more details on wilaya. Before Ibn Arabi, there was a 3rd century saint. His name is Hakim Tirmizi. He wrote a book on Khatab al-Awliya, and he asked 157 questions about the Wilaya, Khatamul Wilaya, and 300 years no one responded to those questions. But Ibn Arabi, after 300 years, he responded, and he wrote a book of that response. And there he actually explained what is a Wilaya. And there is a big book by William, I think, Shotquij, who wrote this Seal of Saint. He's translated it. So I suggest that one to be read, and then people would understand what is Wilaya and what is Nabuwa. But yes.
Just to add to what you're saying, whenever Sheikh Ahmad Sarhindi writes about Ibn Arabi, he shows so much of respect. At one place he says, Zalla bardare khaneu, that we have picked crumbs from his table. उसके दस्तरखान से हमने टुकड़े उठाए हैं. यानी मैंने शेख इब्न अरबी के दस्तरखान से टुकड़े उठा के उन पे मैंने गुजारा किया है. Showing his respect and his Ibn Arabi. Okay, thank you.
Okay, so many thanks everyone for joining the call, and really appreciate. And many thanks, Dr. Mudasir, Professor. Really appreciate your such a powerful and mind-blowing presentation. And
Thank
so
you.
many thanks.
Thank you.
See you everyone.
Thank you, Noor. Thank you,
Yes.
Noor.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Assalamu
Thank you so
alaikum
much.
wa rahmatullah. Yeah. Ila liqa. Bye.